Was.
That's all right. Okay, we're going to be broadcasting.
We are now.
Welcome, everyone, to our very first community conversation. We're thrilled to be here tonight as we work on the beginnings of what we called in June, becoming an inclusive community. As we all are very much aware, in June, George Floyd was killed by Minneapolis police, and that caused protests across the country. And here in Los Gatos, raising voices for the recognition that there is systemic problems in this country and in this town. And we vowed in our website in June that we were going to do everything we could to be inclusive, to recognize diversity, and to make a difference here. And so in order to get that started, after we did our first declaration in our webpage, which you can find on the town's website, Becoming an Inclusive Community, what we thought is that we needed to have conversations with everybody in Los Gatos so that we could hear everyone's point of view, so that we could listen, learn, and explore ways that we could make our community a better one. And so what we did is, as a town, we convened a group of diverse residents and citizens from across the business community, students who had organized the protests, faith leaders, and members of the police department, members of the town council. And what we did was just try to come up with ideas. What were those issues that we really needed to talk about? How would we best talk about them, and how could we best organize them? So those focus groups just gave us an idea of how to get started, how to get organized, and how to go forward so that we can, again, listen, learn, and figure out solutions, figure out problems together. And so tonight we're having our first of 3 community conversations. This one was going to be focusing on police. And of course, with the first killing of George Floyd, and now unfortunately others that have followed, it's more important than ever that we examine the role of policing across the country and in this community. And that's not to say that policing should be thrown out or policing should be changed altogether. Maybe there's valuable changes that should be made, but what we want to do is have a constructive conversation about what's the proper role, what's the proper funding, and what are the proper responses. And we have put together some policy questions for you all. That doesn't mean you have to stick with them. But tonight we really want to listen to your stories, your thoughts, and your positions regarding how policing should best go forward in Los Gatos. And in order to do that, we have with us an extraordinarily respected former judge in Santa Clara County, and I cannot do her resume justice. She's going to lead us through this evening tonight, and we look forward to listening to her insights and getting her help. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Judge LaDoris Cordell, and thank you very much for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to all of you for participating in this evening's community workshop on policing, a subject of local and national discussion pushed by the Black Lives Matter movement. I am a longtime resident of Palo Alto, and after graduating from Stanford Law School, I practiced law in East Palo Alto for 6 years. I was an assistant dean of the law school at Stanford and eventually served for 20 years on the Superior Court in Santa Clara County. After I retired from the bench in 2001, I returned to Stanford for 8 years, and I was a vice provost, followed by a 5-year stint as the independent police auditor for the city of San Jose. I now spend my time sheltering in place and on Zoom, and I am writing a book about my 2 decades of judging that will be published by Macmillan in the summer of 2021. So at this time, I ask Arn if you would put the agenda up, please, for everyone. Thank you. So whatever your views about the Black Lives Matter movement and about policing, your comments, your questions, and your stories are welcome at this workshop. There are only 3 ground rules for your participation tonight. 1, civility. Democracy is a fragile and precious thing. It works because of transparency in government and because of the social contract in which we all agree to be civil in our discourse and appreciate that we can disagree without being disagreeable. Policing is a controversial subject. Still, I fully expect that all of us will be respectful when various opinions are expressed. Second rule, 3 minutes per speaker. If you want to speak a second time, I will call on you a second time, but only after everyone has had a chance to be heard at least once. And 3, stay on topic. Policing in Los Gatos and policy options for police reform are the topics for this workshop. We will receive your comments and questions in one of 2 ways: written questions and comments that you can type into the Q&A, and I will be reading them because they will be sent to me by Jenna, and also by speaking live. Depending upon how many comments and questions come in each way, I will alternate between the 2 modes. But be assured that every single question and comment will be heard. This means that the panelists and I will stay here for as long as it takes for everyone to have their say. This workshop is being recorded and available for later viewing, and all written questions and comments will be preserved and made available to the public. If you want to comment anonymously, that's fine too. It is impossible to have a meaningful conversation about policing without information. So let's get some of that from Chief Peter DeSena, who will give us an overview of the town's police department. Chief?
Thank you, Judge Cordell. Arn, if I could have the first slide, actually the second slide would be great. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Pete DeSena. I am the Chief of Police of the Los Gatos Montesino Police Department, and I'll be presenting a brief overview of the department and share some data that will hopefully provide context for our conversation. I wanted to start by saying that the Los Gatos Montesino Police Department has had a long history of community engagement and a commitment to a very high level of customer service. This approach was coalesced into what I consider to be the quintessential mission statement created by Chief Scott Seaman in the early 2000s. It's what attracted me to this job in 2018. Solid community partnership balanced with a focus on excellent police work, because even though we strive to take a small town approach to policing, the reality is that Los Gatos is part of a major metropolitan area with all of the associated crime and social issues. But in my 2.5 years as chief here, I've come to realize there is another factor that sets us apart. So I've been a cop now for 40 years, which I realize is longer than most folks in the meeting tonight have actually been alive. But in all my years, I've never experienced the level of compassion that is exhibited by the members of this department on a daily basis. Professionalism and respect go without saying, but it's compassion that sets them apart. Compassion towards victims of crime, from violence all the way to low-level property crimes that we don't even arrest people for anymore. It's compassion for suspects, arrestees, people in mental health crisis, our homeless population. I think it's reflected in the willingness of our officers, our dispatchers, and our professional staff to listen and take every possible step to help people find some kind of resolution to their issue. Of course, resolution doesn't always occur, but I think most folks come away with a sense that we actually care because we do. So last year we held a strategic leadership retreat, identified our core values: integrity, compassion, professionalism, and updated our mission statement to include these core values. Now, I'm pretty sure that compassion probably raised a few eyebrows in the organization, but I felt very strongly about it, and sometimes it's good to be chief. Next slide, please, on. So we provide police services to the town of Los Gatos and by contract to the city of Montesino. As you can see, our area of responsibility is about 13 square miles, and we serve a population about 34,000. In terms of staffing, we are authorized 39 sworn, but we actually have 32 that we consider to be operational. So operational is street ready. We currently have 2 vacancies we're trying to fill. We have 2 recruits in the field training program, 2 officers on long-term leave for on-the-job injuries, and 1 officer that is completing, thankfully, his 1-year commitment to military leave. Typically, ideally, we have 26 officers assigned to patrol division that provides 24 hours a day, 365-day-a-year coverage. We'd like to have a sergeant, a corporal, and 3 to 4 officers assigned per 4 patrol teams, but the reality is we're usually at minimum staffing, which is a supervisor and 3 officers. So we also have 22 civilian staff, which encompasses our dispatchers, our record staff, and our parking control officers, among others. And as you see, we have 206 volunteers, a pretty incredible number. The bulk of that is our community emergency response team volunteers, our CERT team. We also have members of the DART team, which is the Disaster Assistance Response Team. We're in the process of revitalizing and reorganizing our victims support unit. And we also have VIPs, which are volunteers in policing that help with tasks around the department every day. Go ahead and switch the slide on. In terms of our crime stats, these annual averages are calculated over a 5-year period. For calls for service, we average about almost 30,000 on an annual average basis. It also includes self-initiated activity, which is car stops, pedestrian stops, premise checks, etc. As you can see, on the average, we write about 2,600 reports per year. The vast majority they fall in a category of other, which is typically like warrants, traffic collisions, informational reports, missing persons, medical aids, violation of probation, and civil cases. As you can see, we're fortunate we don't have a lot of crimes against persons, but we do have quite a few, about 800 property crimes that we write reports for. On the average, we arrest about 1,000 people per year. Next slide, please. Use of force. So from 2015 to 2019, Los Gatos Monitoring and Police Department officers had over 85,000 contacts with the community. Of these contacts, approximately 5,000 arrests were made. And in all of these contacts and arrests, our officers used force in only 21 cases. Now, I'm not super good at math, which is why I became a cop, but it calculates down to 0.024% of the time officers use force. So by way of explanation of our pie graph, the majority of the force, 10 cases, was involving body force, and that's typically hands to either apply a control hold or perhaps take a suspect to the ground. In 6 cases, we use what's known as the wrap restraint. And the wrap restraint is a device utilized when a suspect has been handcuffed but continues to resist. So they're basically placed in a sitting position, and the wrap restraint is applied to the legs so that they can be controlled and transported. In 2 cases, we deployed the taser, and then one each case of impact weapon, which is a baton, a canine deployment, as well as a carotid restraint. And by way of explanation, we do not allow chokeholds. Chokeholds are prohibited by our policy. However, we do allow the use of the carotid restraint, which is the application of pressure on either side of the neck that restricts the flow of blood to the brain and renders a suspect unconscious. It's a sleeper hold used in wrestling, etc. I think there are a number of factors that impacts our really pretty low use of force stats. Training is critical. About 95% of our officers have undergone a 40-hour training in crisis intervention, which is dealing with people in mental health crisis. 100% of our dispatchers have gone through, I think it's a 16-hour course of the same thing, CIT. We have training in cultural diversity, implicit bias, racial profiling, fair and impartial policing, and we've incorporated over the last 2 years training in mindfulness and compassion cultivation. In 2019, we received a POST Innovations Grant. POST is the California Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, and we received about $78,000 to develop and implement a post-certified 8-hour annual training program with focus on enhancing our defensive tactics proficiency and incorporating de-escalation tactics into that training. Policy, I think, is very important. We're obviously undergoing a lot of policy changes as a result of the unlawful killing of George Floyd. But about a year ago, we incorporated a policy section that dealt with tactical conduct. And quite frankly, we stole it from San Jose PD. And that basically, typically use of force is evaluated from when the force initiates. But we incorporated this tactical conduct concept into our policy, whereby officers will be evaluated by their actions leading up to the use of force will be evaluated. So the basis of it is the core transaction, which is either a lawful detention or a lawful arrest. If you don't have either of those, no force is going to be reasonable. We discuss the level of urgency, whether it's the suspect present imminent credible threat, physical harm, or is it possible to wait for other officers? Threat assessment, officers are required to seek out information that will give them an assessment about what they're going into. Along those lines, we just instituted the SNAP program, which is the Special Needs Assessment Program, whereby community members can voluntarily and confidentially sign up family members or loved ones who may suffer from issues like dementia, or they're on the autism spectrum, or something that may impact how officers interact with them. So this is input into our dispatch system, and when officers are dispatched to a particular address, that information will come up and give the officers an idea about what they're getting into. Of course, cover, concealment, distance and time are very important to utilize that in order to slow things down and help avoid or minimize the use of force. And then, as I mentioned, CIT techniques. Most of our officers are trained in CIT, but if not, they are expected to call a CIT officer in a case where there's someone in mental health crisis. Finally, I think body-worn cameras. Los Gatos Montesino Police Department was an early adopter of body-worn cameras about 2009. And in 1999, they were actually employing dash cam technology. So we are currently in the process of transitioning to a new system, because we have the same system since 2009, which is going to enhance our capability to record our interactions. Next slide, please. So personnel complaints, as you see, we've since 2015, in the last 5 years, we've had 13 complaints, which are a combination of citizen initiated and department initiated. Every complaint is accepted and investigated, even anonymous complaints. You can make a complaint by telephone, mail, email, or in person. The process is basically to complete a complaint form, which is found online, or you can come in and do it in person. The complaint form is reviewed by our IA commander, who is our captain in charge of support services, and then as needed, assigned to a sergeant for investigation if it's an officer, and if it's a sergeant that the complaint is against, then a captain will do the investigation. If there is a potential conflict of interest, we do have a group of external investigators that we utilize to do these investigations. When the investigation is completed, it is routed to the chain of command to me for approval. At the conclusion, the complainant receives a written notification of completion and a finding of the investigation. So just to explain it, we have the findings listed for our 13 complaints. The standard of evidence is preponderance of evidence. Is it more likely than not that the violation occurs? So sustained is that investigation disclosed sufficient evidence to clearly prove the allegation. Not sustained is that it failed to disclose sufficient evidence to clearly prove or disprove the allegation. Exonerated is that the acts did occur, however, the investigation revealed that the acts were justified, lawful, and proper. Unfounded is an investigation conclusively proved that the acts in the complaint did not occur, or that the member named was not involved. And then no finding is that the complainant failed to disclose promise information. In other words, the complainant made a complaint, but then wouldn't cooperate in the investigation, so we're not able to make a finding. Next slide, please. So the Assembly Bill 953, which is the Racial and Identity Profiling Act of 2015, or RPIA, requires that every agency that employs peace officers in the state of California must report annually to the Attorney General data on all stops conducted during the preceding calendar year. So implementation of RPIA is incremental based on the size of the agency. For us, our size less than 334 sworn, we will need to submit a report in April 2023 for the data for 2022. So each stop requires that officers fill out essentially a 4-page report. It includes information like the reason and the result of the stop, if an arrest was made or offense was charged, the perceived race or ethnicity, gender, and approximate age of the person stopped. And this is based on the officer's perception, because officers are not allowed to request information from the person stopped. And then actions taken by the peace officer, which include included but not limited to, like was a consent to search requested, was a search done, was property found, et cetera, et cetera. So the information that I'm presenting tonight is over the last over a 2-year period. So we are transitioning to a new CAD RMS system, which is computer aided dispatching / record management system. that will allow us to capture the RPIA data electronically. So our current system does not have that capability. So the only data we can collect related to ethnicity is from arrests and citations, which we did over a 2-year period, simply because it's a cumbersome process. So it's at best an incomplete picture. And I know statistician, but I think it's sort of widely recognized that even though we provided census data pertaining to the ethnic breakdown of Los Gatos, I think comparing stop data to census data does not really provide an accurate portrayal of the level of bias by the officers. So just to clarify that the bottom row there, other includes South Asian or Asian Indian, Filipino, Guamanian, Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, Native American, mixed race, or unknown. And in essence, I think that's all the information I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Does the town attorney have any comments that he wants to make, Mr. Schultz?
Yes, good evening. Rob Schultz, I'm the town attorney. I think many of the attendees might have met me or know who I am, but I'd give you a brief introduction about myself. I've been practicing law for 33 years. The first 10 years I was in private practice suing cities, towns, and counties. The last 23 years I've been representing cities and towns, and since 2013, I've been the town attorney for Los Gatos. As town attorney, I represent the town and provide legal advice to not only the town council, but to staff and the departments, including all of the personnel issues. During my career, I've been involved in hundreds of personnel matters involving internal investigations, and have also served as a hearing officer in disciplinary actions. I also serve on the State League of California Cities Labor Relations Policy Committee, which reviews the pending bills in Sacramento and reviews other personnel issues that are hot topic issues in the state. I also serve on the board of directors for a joint powers authority that oversees claims and settlements for 28 Bay Area cities. So one of the issues I just wanted, after my background, wanted to briefly discuss is the many emails the town council has received and the town has received contain a statement that says discontinue use of general fund dollars to pay for settlements due to the police murder, misconduct, and negligence. So I just wanted to briefly state that since 2013, since I became the town attorney, the town has been involved in only one police misconduct lawsuit. The settlement for that one lawsuit was reached for $7,000 and $7,200. The lawsuit involved an illegal search and seizure while the town officers, police officers, were helping other agencies in a drug-related case that was not in Los Gatos. The many agencies were sued in that litigation, and the town paid $7,200 to get out of the case. Basically, a nuisance value was paid. There has been no other lawsuits for the town involving our police officers since 2013. In regard to this request in the emails, it's important to understand that the state law requires the town to defend and indemnify their police officers in lawsuits and pay any claim or judgment unless the police officer's act or omission was because of actual fraud, corruption, or actual malice. In my 33 years, I've only seen that about 2 or 3 times where that was invoked. And the actual malice and fraud and corruption is a very high standard. And that state law requires us to, as I said, defend and indemnify and also pay any judgments if it's not for actual fraud, corruption, or actual malice. So the town cannot legally make a rule or make a law that would prevent us from using general funds to pay for settlement at this time. That would have to come from Sacramento. And that was basically the only thing I wanted to address at this time. I might have some other further comments based on the input from the attendees.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Police reform is a major focus of new legislation in Sacramento. So I want to very briefly draw your attention to 3 bills, 2 of which just passed and likely to be signed by the governor, if not already. The first is AB 1196. That law bans the use of chokeholds and carotid restraints by law enforcement. And it also bans techniques and transport that poses a substantial risk of positional asphyxia. What that means is putting a person who is being transported by the police in a position such as maybe lying prone that results in compressing a person's airways so that the person cannot breathe. It's my understanding that if that bill has been signed or will shortly be signed, it will go into effect immediately. There's no waiting time for that. So that would ban carotid restraints, which are currently used in Los Gatos. Second, AB 1506. That law creates a new division in the State Department of Justice called the Statewide Office of Deadly Force Investigations. And that new division will be overseen by the State Attorney General. So that office, that new office, is required to investigate and, if appropriate, prosecute officer-involved shootings that killed unarmed civilians. District attorneys will no longer have the authority to prosecute those cases. The bill also creates a police practices division to review patterns and practices of individual police agencies and make recommendations for better police practices. The third is SB 731. This bill did not come up for a vote, but is definitely going to be reintroduced in the next session of the legislature. It would have established a statewide decertification process for law enforcement. When an officer is fired for excessive force, for sexual misconduct, or for dishonesty, under this bill, he could be, or she could be, decertified, rendering that person unable to be hired by any other law enforcement agency in California. Currently, there is nothing to stop officers who have been fired from being hired by other departments. 45 states have some sort of a decertification process. And just as a quick comparison, for example, lawyers have to be licensed by the state bar. If they engage in misconduct that is so egregious that it requires their licenses to be revoked, that can happen. So there is a decertification process for other professions, such as for lawyers, but not yet in California for law enforcement. All right, now, Laurel Prevetti, your town manager, is going to talk about the 3 police reform options for your consideration tonight. She will also explain the process that brought these options to the table. And after that, we go to you for your comments, your ideas, and your questions. Laurel.
Thank you, Judge, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's wonderful to see so many of you here. So as was mentioned, the town has been receiving a lot of email and calls and other correspondence ever since the untimely death of Mr. George Floyd. Many of those comments have also come to our town council in the form of verbal communications and other town meetings, such as our general plan update. And from these various communications, we've heard 3 main themes of potential ideas for our town council to consider as reforms. This by no means limits the conversation for tonight, but I do want to put them on the table so that way you have an opportunity to elaborate on the idea, tell us whether you think it is something Los Gatos should pursue, or perhaps you have some new ideas for our council to consider. So the first one is to divert funding from the police department to hire a social worker who would then be the first point of contact for any mental health or homeless type of service call. So that's idea number 1. And I just want to also clarify that these ideas are not fully developed because we're also hoping that tonight you can help us with that further elaboration. The second idea is to disarm our school resource officer that provides services to all of our schools here in Los Gatos. I've had the opportunity to job shadow him, and he works primarily at our high school and middle school, but he is available to all of our schools. This is through a partnership with our school districts, our public school districts. And so there is a question as to whether or not this individual should be armed while providing those services, or whether we should cancel the partnership entirely with the school district. The third question, or the third option, is to create some form of community oversight over police activities. And this could take many, many forms. Judge Cordell, of course, oversaw the police auditor for the city of San Jose and is very familiar with the various models that this could take. But we are open to that possibility as well as the other two options. And I turn it back to the judge for opening it up to community conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laurel. One of the three options, before we go to the participants, to all of you, one of the three options is under consideration is some form of civilian oversight. Because there's frequently confusion about what this means, and because I engaged in civilian oversight over the San Jose Police Department, I'm going to just take just no more than 2 minutes to explain what police oversight is. So oversight is oversight over complaints of misconduct against law enforcement. Some people think it means you're standing out and you have people watching the police as they do their work. That's not what civilian oversight is. So again, it is oversight over the investigations of complaints of misconduct. There are 8 basic types of complaints that members of the public can lodge against officers: excessive force, discourtesy, violation of procedures, neglect of duty, conduct unbecoming, bias-based policing, improper arrest or detention, and improper search or seizure. When a complaint is made in most police agencies in this country, it is the police who investigate themselves. That is the case here in Los Gatos. In cities where there is independent civilian oversight, the models differ. In Oakland, the oversight body has the power to investigate complaints and to discipline officers. And recently, they fired the police chief, who is now suing the city of Oakland. In San Francisco, the oversight body has subpoena power and conducts investigations. In San Jose, the police investigate themselves. In other words, they investigate complaints, but those investigations then are reviewed by the police auditor's office. There is now pending for vote in San Jose a change that would allow the auditor to conduct the investigations and not the police department, but that'll be up to the voters. If you want to know more about civilian oversight models, I suggest please go to NACOLE, N-A-C-O-L-E. That's an acronym, N-A-C-O-L-E, for the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. That's the umbrella organization for all civilian oversight agencies in the entire country. And that's just www.nacole.org. Okay, now it is your turn to speak and for our panelists and city leaders to listen. As a reminder, the topic is policing in the town of Los Gatos and also in Monte Sereno. If it should be better, can policing do better, and if it should, how? So I'm going to ask Shelley, and it's Shelley, is it Nice or Nice? Nice?
It's Nice.
Nice, thank you. Shelley Nice. And Shelley's going to introduce speakers 3 at a time, so you'll be able to get ready. And then Jenna is going to text me your written comments and questions, and I'll alternate between the two. So I'll ask Shelley if you would start and ask the first 3 speakers each to come up, and remind them I have a timer that I'll be looking at, and each speaker has 3 minutes to either comment, have a question, tell your story. Go right ahead, Shelley.
Okay, so if you would like to speak, please use the raise your hand button. Right now, I only have one person, and that's Ali Miano, and I apologize if I spelled or pronounced that incorrectly. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see here, there's the timer, great. Okay, so I am concerned about 2 issues in Los Gatos. One is over policing and the other is racial profiling, both of which I have seen. Over policing, I saw just the other day when I was walking my dog in Bachman Park. A man had apparently, maybe he slept in the creek bed that night. and there were 4 police cars, 2 apparent social workers, a fire truck, and an ambulance, all to get one placid man out of the creek and into an ambulance. It seemed like way overkill for somebody who was not resisting police presence in the least. I'm not sure why he had to be handcuffed because he was in a creek bed. I didn't see everything that might have happened, but that seemed like a clear case of over-policing to me. So yes, I want to emphasize, and I'm sure many of my fellow members of the Los Gatos Anti-Racism Coalition will speak to that issue further about allocating some of these resources for mental health and other forms of wellness versus over-policing. And the other is racial profiling. I think you saw clearly in the statistics that Chief Decena put forth that we have issues with disproportionate arrests of Black, Latinx, and maybe also the category of other that you spoke to. I myself, I am not Latina, but I am often taken for one. In fact, I've been the coordinator of the Spanish language program at Stanford for 30 years. And so yes, one day I was riding with the windows down, playing my salsa music really loud. And guess what? I got stopped by a Los Gatos policeman. This was in 2008. And when I put forth a complaint and I said, this is a case of racial profiling, I may be Italian, but he thought I was Latina and that's why he stopped me. And the ticket that he issued to me had to be thrown out because I had not even committed a violation. But when I complained, they did an internal review. And guess what? They said it wasn't racial profiling, when in my view, it clearly was. But I had nothing to stand on. The police had the final word. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. I hope you can do something about the racial profiling going on in Los Gatos.
Thank you. Shelley, do we have any other speakers ready at this time?
We do not.
All right, I'm going to go to some questions and they appear all to be directed to the chief. Here's the first one. There are 3. The first, will you please clarify when and I'm going to add the word body, that's not in here, but when the body camera is required to start and stop during all public interactions?
Yes, our
Chief?
policy, can you hear me? Yeah. So our officers are required to activate their body-worn cameras during all enforcement stops and field contact situations. Initially, we're updating that because we're updating our body-worn camera system. So again, it's a advanced system with better battery life, et cetera, et cetera. So we're actually expanding the times that officers have to activate. But typically, it's anytime they have, in essence, contact with the system, they should. And we realize there are some instances where there may be some issues, but they should be activating their body-worn camera.
Second question, is the recording automatically sent to a neutral third-party database where it cannot be altered?
Yes, with this new body-worn camera system, it does have a sort of a cloud-based data collection that is, and again, aside from not being a mathematician, I'm not much of a techie, but in essence, it cannot be altered. It's automatic uploaded. There are digital fingerprints such that anyone who has touched that, it's noted. So it's essentially tamper-proof.
Third question, how often do officers change partners? I do not trust our police officers. I want to be sure that at all times now and in the future, we have total accountability.
Well, here in Los Gatos Montesino Police Department, we do not have partners. We obviously don't have the staffing for that. And I don't think it's a particularly good model for policing. So we have patrol teams that change shifts, and the officers get to bid every 6 months. So officers ride individually with the exception of our canine officer who rides with her partner. And we do have, when the recruit officers in training, they will ride with the training officer, but those are the only instances where we have 2 officers riding in a car.
All right, thank you, Chief. Shelley, do we have any live speakers?
Yes, we do. So it'll be Lee Fago, Catherine Summers, and Amy. Lee Fago will be first.
Unmute. Good evening. And
Welcome, Lee.
thank you very much for putting on this program. Really appreciate the outreach that you have initiated and the commitment that I can see from all the various folks involved. Thank you. I had a couple of questions or comments. First is, a number of years ago, I did 2 ride-alongs with the police. Obviously, we can't do that right now, but it was very enlightening. And it was done, the first time was done probably about 12 years ago, when teens, because I was on the board of directors for the teen center, were complaining about police. And so I did a ride along to see what was going on, and it was very enlightening. What I saw was, in the first ride along, that officer did more to prevent and to stop issues of potential crime being committed, violations, traffic violations, but also trying to help these people find resources to help them with their emotional issues. The second ride along was also very enlightening, in that I saw the police very, very committed to helping someone who did commit a crime to calm down and to be in good care before anything escalated any further. He really spent some time doing that, and I was impressed. The other point I want to make is, do we have a system, and I'd like to learn a little more about it, that first responders going to non-criminal activity, the police going to a call? I know we have a SNAP system. I don't know that well enough. I'd like to learn more about it. But would it make sense to have, when dispatch gets a call and they determine that it's not a criminal activity, but a social, psychological issue, to immediately engage the right social resource in addition to the officer as a support person then for the social emotional worker who would be going to engage that citizen. I'd like to talk later about the school resource officer when we get into that topic, but those are the questions, concerns, and the compliments I have, to be honest, for the work that I see all of you doing, and we truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Our next speaker is Catherine. Welcome, Catherine.
Okay, unmute. Hi, my name is Catherine Summers, and I'm the Executive Director of the Los Gatos Chamber of Commerce. And I'm actually really more speaking as just a observer of our police department. Well, in many ways, and it does actually revolve around my job a little bit as well. But I had a specific question for Chief DeSena, which was, I'd love to know the makeup of our police department, you know, of who you've hired. I mean, to me, I kind of always look at our police department. I think it's really diverse, which I really appreciate about it. And I think a lot of people maybe don't know that. That's one of my questions. The second comment really that I wanted to say, you know, I deal a lot with the downtown businesses and with, you know, the homeless population that we have in Los Gatos. And I do really appreciate that the chief, or just our department, has a designated person who holistically, I think, works with our homeless population and makes sure that they receive the services that they need and directs them to the different people in town that can, service providers that can help them. And then my last question is, my last question with my dogs fighting in the background. Okay. uh, I think I'll stop it there. I just wanted to, yes, I just wanted to kind of point those couple things out and ask those questions. And thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Chief, do you want to address what Catherine raised?
Yes, I can in terms of the ethnicity of the department. And again, this is really based on my observations. So we are fairly reflective of our community. At this point, we are 69% white or Caucasian, 22% Asian or Pacific Islander, 6% Hispanic, and 3% Black. So the only area that we are really down in terms of stats is our gender equality. We are 84% male and 16% female, but that's actually better than a lot of agencies, and it's certainly something we're working on.
Do you have any LGBTQ officers that you know that are out?
Not that have stated as such.
Okay. All right. And thank you, Catherine. Now we go to Amy.
Hi, my name is Amy Nishihi. I know not everybody knows how to pronounce that Japanese name. Okay, I got a few things here. So I actually support all three of those proposals that Lauren mentioned, diverting funds from the police to one social worker, or maybe the number needs to be two, given the small area and population. Maybe we need less armed officers and 2 social workers. I guess that's for you all to figure out. I vote for actually disarming the school resource officer. I can't imagine why a cop with a gun needs to walk around a school. That person is not going to stop a mass shooting, as we've already observed with other schools and religious places. And I also support creating the community oversight, civilian oversight that the judge was talking about. I totally support that. I have 2 questions. I was hoping, I guess, the police chief might answer. This one I've addressed with some community liaison officer whose name I forgot. Is while a police officer is walking around town, or especially like the farmer's market or a protest, why are they not wearing masks? Since obviously your job is to protect and serve, I consider wearing a mask protecting people. I wear one when I'm downtown. And the second question is, when the ex-San Jose State police officer Silva, I think his name was hired, there was a pretty big community, outrage about that. And eventually he resigned. I'm curious as to why he was even hired in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Chief, can you address Amy's questions?
I can. I think the first question in terms of masks, our officers are required to wear masks. We've had a couple of slip-ups. That's been addressed. And if you ever see any of our officers not wearing masks, please give us a call and we'll rectify that, because they should be. The question about Officer Silva is a much longer question. I'd be happy to discuss it. I was indeed the chief that hired Jonathan at San Jose State when he was one of our cadets. I oversaw the use of force case that was so controversial, and I was the chief that hired him here at Los Gatos Montezuma Police Department, and I was the one that oversaw his resignation. So it is a much longer conversation than what happened tonight. If you want to contact me, I'd be happy to lay out my rationale for doing what I did, but I really pretty much stand by my decisions as they occur.
All right. I'm now going to go to, thank you, Amy. Now going to go to 3 questions that have come in by Q&A. The first for the chief. I am a lifelong resident of Los Gatos, Montezuma. I am deeply concerned about the uniforms I see around town. Why are officers wearing the military style look, combat pants, etc., instead of the usual blue uniform? I think it's completely inappropriate for officers to be patrolling our peaceful community in the military style uniforms, as it is intimidating and not in alignment with a community service mentality. Can you commit tonight that officers will be wearing the blue uniform when on patrol in our community? Chief?
Thank you for that question. I will say that I am a traditionalist when it comes to uniforms, and I really struggled with we call them external vest carriers. Now, that was already in place before I came on board here, but when I was at San Jose State, I was allowing officers to wear that. And it's really more of a health issue. I know the appearance at times can be a little more paramilitary looking, but a lot of the times officers, for long-standing officers, tend to develop back issues because of the weight that's worn around their waist. It's typically up to like 20 pounds worth of gear. So it is really more of a health thing. And again, it's already been done here. Ours are blue. They do wear pants that have pockets on the side, which is more utilitarian, but we don't blouse our pants. So I think that's not quite as military, but again, I think in essence, the horses kind of left the barn on that one. It'd be very difficult to go backwards, even though my preference is for a standard uniform.
Your Honor, if I may, this is Rob
Go ahead,
Schultz.
Sure, go ahead.
SB 480, which just passed, it's on the governor's desk, would bar law enforcement officers in most cases from wearing camouflage uniforms or other similar military uniforms. So that's kind of been dealt with. That must have been a pretty big issue up at the state level and across the state. So there'll be changes, and we'll have to look at that. It's most cases, there are some exceptions to it, but for those that have been worried about that issue, I think it's being addressed at the state level.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Question number 2 in Q&A for the chief. My interactions with the police department since moving to Los Gatos in 2003 have been limited, yet always positive, and was impressed most recently with the department's collaboration with the local high school students who organized a protest in support of Black Lives Matter movement. How do you train officers to handle situations of potential racial profiling? For example, community members calling the police because of perceived threats by a Black or brown person in a neighborhood or in a store. Chief?
That's an excellent question. We do get calls by our residents calling persons in the neighborhood that they're not familiar with, and oftentimes they are people of color. Officers respond out because that's what we are, again, very customer service oriented. If people call, we will respond. Typically, if the person is doing something that's illegal or inappropriate, illegal, then we'll address it. But by and large, in most cases, they're not. They're just walking through the neighborhood. So we just let them continue on after the initial contact.
Chief, do you ever follow up with the person who made the call where there was nothing wrong, but their concern was they just didn't think the person should be in that space? Your officers ever follow up with those people?
They do, because oftentimes the people do request a call back, and it's explained to them. We do get groups of young people, typically of color, that are part of the peddling group. They'll go through with the magazine subscription. So we'll kind of get an onslaught of these in a particular area, and it's explained to the person calling in that yes, the person's there, they have the appropriate peddling permit or what have you. If they're not doing anything wrong, there's really nothing you can do about that.
Our third question, Chief, in the Q&A. God bless our law enforcement officers. I relocated in July 2017 and had my privilege bubble burst open in May. My environment appears safe, but I don't feel safe in my head. The reality is that there are racist and violent police officers who remain on the police force and enjoy impunity. They are bad influences and are like cancer. They haven't helped this society for over a century. How can this be addressed if we seek to operate in verity and are truly ready to tackle issues? Chief, I don't know if this is more a philosophical question, but if you want to respond, fine. If not, we can move on to our live speakers.
It's Yes, it's philosophical, Judge Cordell, but it's also a very pertinent question. Um, uh, I I think the judge knows better than I do, and had some training that everyone has biases. Everyone has a bias about something. It's the way our brains work. I cannot tell my officers what to think, but what we can tell them is how to act. And they are to treat all people fairly and impartially. I strongly don't believe that we have overt racists in the department, and quite frankly, I wouldn't stand that. I perhaps notice that I'm a person of color myself. My kids, even in these days, have to deal with some biases and incidents at school, and it's not appropriate. So I guess my only statement, or I would say that I'm not going to stand for it. That's not how this community exists. That's not how this organization, and I guess I have to leave with that.
Thank you, Chief. Shelley, do we have any speakers now?
We do. We have two more. The first one will be Jeffrey Suzuki, and the second will be Nika Saburi.
Okay, Jeffrey, you're up and welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead, Jeffrey.
Thanks for having me. So I just wanted to go over a few points. The first point's relatively quick. It's I think people might get the wrong impression that a carotid restraint is, as Chief DeSena said, a wrestling move, and they might come out with the conclusion that it's not particularly dangerous. I understand that there are bills going through currently, but I just wanted to highlight for everybody's knowledge, it is precisely cutting off the blood flow to the brain, precisely that's dangerous. As somebody who does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, we're told that depriving the brain of oxygen for more than a minute will lead to basically permanent brain damage, and anything more than that basically risks death. So it's people that pass out despite the fact that they're able to speak and breathe that is extremely dangerous. Second, I just wanted to state that civilian oversight is essential. There's a running joke about police departments investigating themselves and finding no wrongdoing with their own behavior. Regardless of I'm sure that the police department is full of great individuals, but regardless of the individuals in each police department, they're incentivized to look after their teammates, to preserve the integrity of their own police department so that they have a job. I want to be absolutely clear that I'm not insulting the character of our police department. The establishment of civilian oversight board is essential to prevent tragedy in the future. We shouldn't have to wait for a tragedy to befall Los Gatos for somebody to get killed or for some absolutely atrocious instance of harassment to take place for things to change. I believe that as a community, we are mature enough, that we are compassionate enough to bring about this change independent of tragedy. As for the next point, I was wondering if the statistics published on the people arrested, that was a slide presented earlier, I was wondering if they could be published perhaps on a yearly basis, some sort of frequent basis, so that the community knows that this data is being collected and they know the racial and ethnic profile of those who are being arrested. And finally, I wanted to bring attention to a fundamental question, which is there were 21 uses of force, or 0.024% of cases, originally said. If the use of force is that low from police officers, or if situations that require force comprise that low of a proportion, I think we have to fundamentally ask the question, why would our first response be sending an armed officer to the scene? There's an inherent paradigm when it comes to possessing a weapon. And if the vast majority of situations don't require that, then I believe that we have to fundamentally ask that question of why. Why send somebody who is armed to a nonviolent situation? Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And Chief, do you have any comments you want to make at this time?
Just to the first point, Mrs. Suzuki, I didn't mean to imply that the carotid restraint is not a dangerous move. It is. It has a potentially lethal aspects. But I didn't mean to make light of it with the wrestling conference reference. And I was going to make a point to your second question, but unfortunately, I sort of lost it. So unless the judge can help jog my memory, I don't recall.
Well, the question was about why, if there are so few uses of force, over the years in your slide, why should officers be armed when they're out in patrol?
Yeah, it was actually the question before that, but to that's a long and philosophical discussion about why we even need police, and I don't really have a short answer for that.
The second one was civilian oversight.
Civilian oversight. Right.
Oh, correct. Yeah, and honestly, I really think that that's the direction we're going, and I'm we have to discuss what that model looks like, but I think especially for small departments. I don't necessarily disagree with that approach.
All right, so next is Nika. Welcome.
Hi, if it's okay with everyone, I'd like to bring up some of my own experiences with the Los Gatos Police Department. I've lived here my whole life.
Absolutely.
And I've had some relatives. I have an uncle who, up until a year ago, he lived on Via Avenue. And one day he drove in his car to the 7-Eleven, so it was like a block away, and he drove back, and he was pulled over by police officers, Los Gatos Police Department officers, asked to leave his car. He had his, hands on the front of the car and everything, and he was searched. And then, his house, he was parked right in front of his home, and his wife, who is a white woman, he's Iranian American, and oftentimes we're perceived as Latin American or Hispanic. And she said hi, she waved at the police officers, she waved at her husband, and they immediately let him go and left him alone. And so not all of the incidences of police misconduct that we've seen in Los Gatos have had a settlement or have been investigated or been brought to some sort of discussion, but I think that this is definitely something that a lot of Los Gatos residents have experiences with. I know that somebody in the chat mentioned the protest in June, and I was one of the organizers for that. And I think the role that the Los Gatos Police Department played in that was, for my first time organizing something, it was, oh, sorry. At first, I spoke to Captain Tada. A majority of my conversations were with Captain Tada. And at first, I think a lot of his efforts were in de-escalating the situation and even canceling the protest. And a lot of the responsibility of the threat of violence was put onto me. And I understand that the Los Gatos Police Department wants to do everything it can to maintain a peaceful environment, but I don't think that that is within the jurisdiction of anybody and any institution. So thank you.
Thank you, Nika. I want to note, I'm not seeing the timer.
So Judge, we are having a technical difficulty.
No problem, Shelley, because I can keep time up here. We're fine. We're fine when it comes up.
Yeah, and I'm doing it on my phone also.
All right.
So we do have a third person if you want to take a third.
Sure, absolutely. Who is that?
Kareem Saeed.
All right, Kareem, go right ahead and welcome.
Thank you. Peace and blessings, everyone. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
So I just wanted to begin again by thanking the city and everyone for having this forum for us to come together as a community and find a way to move forward. And I think one of the things that, part of being part of the Anti-Racism Coalition and here in Los Gatos, one of the things we recognize is that the reason we're here together is because to exhibit that compassion that we feel that we as a community need to come together and exhibit that compassion and make sure that the individuals in our community whose voices have been silenced or haven't been being heard need to come to the forefront. And we see that, even in my limited interactions with the police department, it's been of compassion. I think we've had good relationship in terms of just working and discussing, but we also recognize we have blind spots. And I think what we're seeing now is that we're coming together and finding a way to kind of find a path forward to come up with a solution to address those voices that haven't been being heard and address kind of like what a lot of the other members of this coalition have been bringing forward is that there has been some serious issues and we have to come up with a solution. And actually this question is more specifically directed to Judge Ladoris is, in your experience in like the different cities, you said that, the civilian oversight has taken different forms. And what have you seen is the most effective in terms of which direction should we be following? and also like what has worked, what hasn't worked, and what we can maybe add as a city to make sure that we are addressing kind of the issues that we're facing from a place of, you know, compassion and caring, and making sure that we're moving forward to making a better society and better community. Thank you.
Kareem, thank you for your question. It would take too long for me to answer your question because it does require a lot of information. I do have my own thoughts and ideas about what works and what could work well, I think, in Los Gatos. So let me suggest that I reiterate, look at, you know, go to the website on NACOL, because you can get some information about where these agencies are, and look to see if there are any of these oversight agencies in cities or towns that are about the size, or the police departments are about the size of the one here in Los Gatos. I do have my own ideas, and I will just tell you the key to all of them is making sure that in my view, the police should not be investigating themselves, because the community, there's just no trust in any place. If you talk about if lawyers just investigated themselves, if judges just investigated themselves, there would, you know, the accountability is missing. So I think that's the first step. And then the models vary. And as I said, in some, for example, in Oakland, it's just total political, you know, close to chaos, where, you know, so there's different models. And I'd encourage you to look at what is being proposed for the city of San Jose, not the auditor's office when I was there, because we didn't have the teeth we should have had, but what is being proposed now. And I think that's really a major step. But we can maybe talk further at some point. Thank you so much, though. It was a thoughtful question. I'm going to go now to 3 questions coming in from the Q&A. The first, why, I guess this is directed to the chief, why are personnel complaints investigated internally? It seems any complaint without independent review would suffer from a blatant conflict of interest, as cultures of silence and protectionism in other police departments across the country are well documented. Can you commit to an independent review body? Chief?
As I mentioned, I'm not opposed to the idea. I think it's difficult in a smaller agency to conduct internal investigations that are people going to look at. We do have issues with, you know, conflict of interest when we're doing these investigations, which is why we have a cadre of external investigators that we utilize. But again, I'm not opposed to the idea. Again, I think discussion is what that oversight will look like.
Thank you, Chief. Question number 2. What do you attribute, and again, this is back to you, Chief, what do you attribute your disproportionately high arrest rate of Hispanics and Black individuals to?
That's a really good question. And again, the data that we presented was, you know, incomplete. It is only arrests and citations. It doesn't encompass all stops, et cetera. Other than that, I just, you know, again, the data is pretty new to us. We've been compiling it very recently. I think it's just a snapshot, and I would like to delve into it more. So with this new CAT RMS, we are going to be, even though we have till 2022, we are going to start collecting stop data as we go along, incrementally in preparation for going to the state. And I think that was Mr. Suzuki's point, was that we will be publishing, incorporating that on our website, so the community can see what our stop data looks like.
And a third question, Chief, what is the ethnicity makeup of the police department? I know you've already answered it, but you want to just go over the percentages one more time?
Certainly, it is 69% white or Caucasian, 22% Asian, Pacific Islander, and in that is incorporated some mixed race, 6% Hispanic and 3% Black.
Thank you, Chief. Now we go to Shelley. Do we have any speakers?
So we have 4. 3 have already spoken, but Emmerich Bisbee and a new one, Daniel, will be the 2 that have not spoken yet. Emmerich Bisbee will be first.
Okay, so there's Emmerich and then Daniel, is that correct?
Correct.
All right, Emmerich, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much. Sorry, my internet has been cutting in and out. I live in the East Los Gatos Hills, and so I'm not sure what kind of satellite situation is going on, but I'm glad to be here. I missed a lot of the conversation. I do know that some people were talking about, especially at the beginning, about training and about like equipment or tech or like body cameras and stuff. And even the name of this workshop being a workshop for police department practices and potential reforms, to me seems to be missing the point, because it seems like there's a lot of people, me included, who are not asking for reform or new policies and procedures or like equipment or tech or more training. We need different programs for different things that the police department are doing, period. And that's going to require reallocating police funds to unarmed first responder programs and social services. I bet some other people already talked about that. Also, I did hear someone say about the officers not wearing masks. And it's especially jarring when those same police officers are standing next to big green signs downtown that say "Protect LG," and the police officers aren't wearing masks. And I think about this conversation that we're having, like asking, the police chief questions, and I just hope that we can shift the conversation away from reform and into reallocating resources, because that seems to me to be the way that we can fix this and we can make everyone feel safe in our community. It's not through more money being funneled into a program that's not helping everyone. So thank you everyone for your time, and I hope my internet can stay through the rest of the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Emmerich. Next is Daniel.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, welcome, Daniel.
Great, thank you. And thank you for holding this. I appreciate having space to talk about these things. I just want to introduce myself a little bit. I'm white, I'm a cis man, I live downtown. So I'm around police officers fairly often just because they tend to be downtown. I do want to point out, I see police without masks every day. And so it's hard for me to understand what the rules are, or what the outlets are for us to report those things. So it'd be good to know that something's being done in that aspect. It's kind of a trend now downtown. It's pretty easy to walk downtown and see many people without masks, and it is frustrating to see public servants also following that trend. It would be great to see that as an example set from the town. So obviously we don't see the level of crime that other jurisdictions do, and it doesn't seem entirely necessary for this level of the budget for what the police holds. And I am specifically looking at the police department expenditures in the budget of $17.5 million in expenditures. 7.9 million is on patrol. That's about 45%. I'd love to know a little more from the chief about what goes into patrol, and what that means, and if there's areas out of there that could be taken, because that is a significant money. And then we have as far as I could tell, as many mental health calls as crimes against people. And I'm wondering if that can be, if it can be enumerated, what % of money on patrol or response could be moved into social services that would address those types of calls. And then my final question, do the contact numbers, when we see those contact numbers, do they come from official reports? As in, do officers report when they've made a contact, like a physical contact or some sort of contact with public, whether that's an arrest or just pulling over? Or is it from a complete review of body camera footage? So are we relying on officers to report incidents and interactions with the public themselves? Or is that reviewed in some other way to get those numbers? And the number, I think it was 85,000 contacts. My final couple points are, how do you gauge buy-in on your mission? You mentioned putting compassion in there and potentially rolled eyes. I can't remember what term you used. How do you ensure that your officers are actually on board with showing compassion to the community? And then are there any services that you as the chief think could be better handled by other departments or other types of services? I know it's a
Thank
lot.
you, Daniel. Thank you. All right, we have a lot of questions, Chief. How do you gauge buy-in? Are there other services you think that could be better served? And he had a question about contacts, and are they just the officers writing up, or are they reviewed, or so you can, there may have been even one more question from there. So Chief, go ahead.
I'll try. There were quite a few questions there. Number one, to address the mask, our officers are required to wear masks. The county public health officers is determined. There may be situations, officer safety, where they shouldn't, they can't wear a mask. The reality, they should be wearing masks. We've bought several different variations, so I'm a little disappointed to hear that our community is saying that they're seeing our officers not wear masks, but it will be addressed. I have both captains listening in tonight, so that will be noted. In terms of other services, the budget question is pretty deep. I don't think I can answer that quickly. I want to point out, we do have a lot of mental health calls in Los Gatos, and our officers go through training. We have a couple officers that deal specifically. They're really kind of our subject matter experts that deal with people with mental health crisis. I will say that I think all the police chiefs in the county understand that mental health is a big concern. Much of our use of force, much of our officer-involved shootings, all involve people with mental health crisis. To that end, we are trying to work with Santa Clara County Behavioral Health Services. I actually represent the county chiefs in a working group with Behavioral Health Services, trying to help them facilitate the mobile crisis response. There are a couple of different models where they're trying to pair up or send out social workers. That's the mobile crisis response. There's also a pairing up a social worker with a specially trained officer. I think we realize there's an issue. I've been attending these meetings for about 2 years. And again, like many people, I have a beloved member of my family that struggles with mental health. So I really understand, and we're really trying to work through. They have been struggling to find, and one of the recommendations was to hire a social worker for the town of Los Gatos. I'd be happy to do that. I think what we're going to see is much like behavioral health services, they are struggling to find licensed clinicians that want to do that kind of work, shift work, be on call, 24/7. I think we all want that, and I'd be happy to it if we can come up with some kind of solution. I think, honestly, if you could take mental health calls and homeless issues off our plate, I'd say defund me in a heartbeat, defund me. But I just don't think we're there yet. We're working on it. I think it's very important, and I'm hoping, but again, we're trying to work towards solutions. And I think that's it. I'm sorry, there were a couple other questions I'm sure I missed there, Judge.
Sure. How do you gauge buy-in?
That's a good one. So part of my incorporation of the core value of compassion was really what I see on a daily basis. Now, of course, again, they're not going to typically tell the chief that you're, full of malarkey, at least to my face. So it's really, I think, how we do business. I mean, there's customer service, but there's just, and I see it in our officers that work with the homeless. I see it in our officers that work with the mentally ill. There is a level of compassion, and as we make that a core value, I think in time, those that again, I can't guarantee buy-in, but we have I can't control their thought pattern, but I can control their patterns of behavior.
One question he had too was about contacts. There were so many contacts per year, and are these all written up in incident reports, or is there body camera footage? How are these documented, all of these contacts?
So all of those contacts are documented via our CAD RMS system. So when an officer makes a stop or makes a contact, he has to go out on the radio. It's an officer safety issue, but it's also a way of collecting data. So all of those were contacts that the dispatcher, the officer advised communications that I'm making a stop, and that was recorded in our record management system.
Daniel, I apologize if I didn't cover all your questions, but I think we got most of them. I'm going to go now to 3 more questions from the Q&A. And these all 3 are directed to the chief. Here's the first one. Clay from K Move. We forgot to ask when you were on our show, why don't police persons walk the beat?
Well, I'm hoping that they do walk the beat now. Obviously, our officers are in cars and they're responding to calls for service, but part of our interaction with the community, part of Chief Seaman's desire for us to get to know everyone in the community is getting out of the car, because it's really hard to talk to someone when you're driving around in a car. So we do have officers that go out on premise check. They should be going out on foot patrol. We don't have the resources at this point to assign specifically someone to walk, say, a downtown walking beat. But I'd love to have that. Again, we just have to, our officers have to be available to answer calls for service.
Thank you, Chief. The second question actually goes to someone maybe in the tech part here. How many people are on Zoom? And I'm assuming that's a question, how many people are participating? Do we know, do we have a number?
I can answer that.
Mayor?
Our highest level was 80. We are down to 59 right now.
Okay, thank you. Third question for the chief. Is a carotid artery restraint necessary to protect your people?
I felt that it was. A number of agencies after the George Floyd killing opted to remove carotid restraint. I think, quite frankly, that at some point with legislation, it will be legislated out of our force options. I was reluctant to remove it completely because it is another tool to address situations such that officers don't have to go to deadly force, although it really is up there. So again, I just changed our policy to reflect that you will not use a carotid restraint unless it's a situation that really equates to a deadly force situation.
And I do think that AB 1196, and I don't know if it's been signed by the governor, it's on his desk, it will ban carotid restraints, carotid artery restraints. It's just going to ban them outright. So they will not be able to be used in any law enforcement agency in California if the bill is signed. But it has gone through both the Senate and the Assembly. All right, we'll go back to our live speakers.
So the only three that I still have with hands raised are three that have already spoken.
That's fine. Go right ahead.
Okay, so
and they are?
Amy, and then Nakia Saburi and Lee Fago. We'll start with Amy.
All right. Welcome back, Amy.
Oops.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Go right ahead.
Okay, so this is Amy Nishihi again. So I'm part of the Los Gatos Anti-Racism Coalition as well. And I will give one positive experience I had with LGPD. One day a man walked into my yard and peed in my bushes. And I didn't particularly care for that. He was working down the street, so I called the LGPD. Somebody came out, found him, came back and told me that if I pressed charges, he could potentially get caught up with ICE. So I said, no way, just ask him not to do it again. So that I consider that a positive thing, that they didn't want him to get deported or something. Anyway, I just wanted to say that it's not all negative. However, I do want to mention, so in regards to community policing, so like my daughter's best friend is Black, and her high school boyfriend was Black, and they didn't get hassled by the police or racially profiled. And I think that's part of the community policing thing where, you know, the police department knew that they lived and went to Los Gatos High School, so they weren't hassled. But I think the fact that the arrest rate is disproportionately higher for Black and Latinos signifies that people who the police don't already know, because those kids don't go to LG High School, or, you know, they don't live in the area, that perhaps those people are actually profiled. And I think that doesn't really jive really well with the town council's desire to make Los Gatos a welcoming community. So Los Gatos is not representative of the Greater Bay Area. It's, you know, large majority white. So people from San Jose, it's a lot more diverse. So people from San Jose like to come into LG for drinks or dinner or lunch or the farmer's market or whatever. So I think we need to take more care in racially profiling in who we stop. And then specifically for the chief, you mentioned that your answer to my question about Mr. Silva was really long, but you'd be happy to provide it offline. I was wondering if, rather than me calling you or emailing, if you could just publish it.
Okay, thank you, Amy and Chief.
I don't know if that got in.
Yeah, we did. We got it. That's
Okay.
fine, Amy. And thank you, Chief. Do you have a response?
Yeah, I again, it's a very complicated, set of circumstances. I don't think I'd be really all that keen on publishing it. But again, I'd be happy to discuss it. There's some nuances. There are clearly some things I wish I could have done better, or should have done better. But the reality is I made decisions based on facts and information I had at the time. And again, I stand by those decisions. So again, I don't think I want to publish something. I'd be happy to attend a community meeting if there are other people, and I think there are, they're concerned about my decision to hire Officer Silva. I'd be happy to sit down and discuss it.
Thank you, Chief.
Judge, if I may, this is Laurel, the town manager. Last year, we had a lot of community members who came forward with similar questions, and the chief and I did take the time to meet with individual community members and discuss those concerns. I think it's very safe to say that the department has really reflected strongly on this experience, and we are even now more rigorous in our hiring and our screening processes and the things that we look for in officers. And I think having a very clear mission and value statement is important as we evaluate individuals that we are considering to bring on to our force. So I know that many members of the public want to understand why he was hired in the first place. And we're, again, as Chief mentioned, we're happy to describe those particular facts. But I think moving forward, it's important to know that we are all learning. And as a learning organization, we think very deeply about the people we offer jobs to. So again, we're happy to discuss it more, but it is a personnel matter. The individual did resign during his probation, and we have to be sensitive to his future as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Laurel. Our next speaker is Nakia. Go right ahead.
Sorry, she lowered her hand, so I'm going to unmute Lee Fago. Oh, wait,
right.
Yeah.
Next is Lee.
Thank you again for the opportunity to speak. I want to say that I agree with the point that Daniel made earlier, and that several people have made over the last few months, and that is that we need to continue more reallocation of resources, and including funds, to deal with the non-criminal calls that the police department receives. I'm going to suggest that the next workshop that this group puts on to be focused particularly on that point, on what other resources can be brought to bear to support the police in its first response to non-criminal activities. The second thing is I wanted to talk about the school resource officer. There was a question about whether the resource officer should be armed or not. I suggested that the officer do be armed in case of any emergency response that would be necessary. And as a policeman, that is part of his persona, his presence, is to be there to protect and to serve. So what I've learned also is that the officer can demonstrate balance, responsibility, and commitment to the school and the students by his or her interactions with the student body while he's on campus, he or she is on campus. There have been some very good responses, particularly at Los Gatos High School over this last several years to the the last 2 years, the school resource officer. Very encouraging. And I'm going to also suggest that the chief possibly join a group on Monday morning. Democracy Tent is a group that's going to be meeting to discuss exactly these issues. Michael Grove, who is the superintendent, and Heath Rocco, who's the chief of student services from the Los Gatos Saratoga High School District, is going to update us on the strategies being developed and implemented to overcome issues of discrimination, sexism, and bullying, as well as racism on the campus and in the student body. Also, Mariko Sayak, who's a town council member, she is also the executive director of CASI, which is a counseling and support services that the district has contracted with to provide resources and professional on-campus mental health services and social services for the students and families. The meeting is Monday morning, 10:30. It'll be Zoom. You can go to losgatosdemocracytent.org and find the link and join us and participate. Everyone in the community is welcome, and the format will be each of those people I just listed, the superintendent, the chief services officer for the district, and the director of CASI will speak. And then the audience will ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. I'm going to go to 3 more questions from the Q&A, and they're all, I believe, directed to the chief. Has the Los Gatos?
Sorry, Judge, I was going to say Nikki raised her hand again, and I have
Oh,
one
great.
person.
That's fine. Let's put Nakia back in. Go right ahead.
So I just wanted to mention the only interference I've seen from police officers so far on campus was in the Fisher Middle School during the walkout, where there was a lot of police presence outside of the school gates to stop students from leaving, because I think that was part of the protest. So for those of us that may be considering supporting the removal of on-campus police officers, specifically at Los Gatos High School, I'm curious what our current on-campus police officer has done so far to protect students.
Okay. Chief?
Well, I would say there's a number of things, and I know there are issues in many school districts with the use of police officers, disciplinarians, et cetera, et cetera. I think we have a very good relationship, and we have really what I consider to be the ideal officer to be the school resource officer. So he was very involved initially when vaping was a really big issue. He was involved with classes to teach the instructors, faculty awareness of vaping. Kids were vaping in class when all of a sudden all the violations and kids getting in trouble for vaping. Officer Stanley developed a vaping diversion class. Typically they get suspended, but he actually developed a class, I think it's like a 6-hour class on Saturdays that the student caught vaping and his parents would have to attend. I think vaping actually kind of went down a little bit, mostly because the parents didn't want to spend their Saturdays in a class with Officer Stanley. He's very involved. We actually funded, we have a close relationship with Dr. Grove and Heath. We actually funded Heath to join us in a behavioral intervention team training. NABITA is the National Association of Behavior Intervention Team. And really it's a collaboration with faculty, counselors, the school resource officer, and we went down and they went down and trained, and hopefully bring that concept back. So I think he's done a number of things other than just that association with the students. His grandson actually attends, I guess I probably shouldn't reveal that, but actually attends the high school there. And I've walked with Officer Stanley as well, and I will tell you that by and large kids will actually say hello to him, reach out to him. I can't get my daughter to say hello to me in the morning, but actually they would reach out and hail Officer Stanley. like I said, it's not really a conversation about arming or disarming Officer Stanley. We're not going to disarm our school resource officer. I think that conversation is whether or not we want a school resource officer on campus. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Nakia. And now we have 3 questions from the Q&A. The first is, has the Los Gatos Police Department received any equipment from the Defense Department program called 1033? If so, what and where is it kept? Chief? Chief, are you there?
Sorry about that. I forgot to unmute. The department did receive information from the 1033 program, also called LISO, or Law Enforcement Supply Organization. We discontinued our relationship with that supply source in 2015. The only items that were received, the only what they call restricted items or serialized items were handheld night vision devices that were returned. The rest of it were like, I think, sleeping bags, elbow and knee pads, and I think some cleaning equipment that they did not request back, but they were no longer associated. And we never received any, obviously, any tanks or armored vehicles or any weapons from the program.
Okay, thank you. Question number 2. The police motorcycles, which I understand are primarily used for traffic matters, carry military-style rifles. Why is this?
So our traffic officers, although their primary function is enforcing traffic laws, they do fill and actually respond to calls. When we have staffing issues, they will actually be assigned calls for service. So they are issued, they're trained and qualify on patrol rifles, as are the majority of our police officers. I think the sad reality of the situation is that our officers need rifles now because they face criminals with high capacity firearms now, as we're seeing from the recent murder of Sergeant Gutzwiller and Santa Cruz County, that they have weapons equal or superior to ours. So they do carry rifles, and it's simply because they respond to patrol calls.
And the third question, Chief, do patrol cars and SUVs also carry such rifles?
Yes, they do. As I mentioned, all of our officers are trained, qualified on the patrol rifle.
Shelley, are there any more live speakers? Shelley, are you there?
We are seeing live speakers, and it looks like Shelley's back online.
My
Okay.
apologies, I forgot to unmute.
That's all right.
We do have 3, 2 new ones and 1 repeat. We'll start with
Okay.
Alicia Cinnamon Stereo, then Heidi Owens, and then Jeffrey Suzuki.
All right, so we'll start with Alicia. Welcome.
Yes, hello. First, I just want to say thank you so much for creating this event and for allowing people to be able to speak about what is important to them. I've spoken to Laura, I've spoken to Marcia, and they're very supportive. I just want to say to Chief DeSena, thank you for being here to answer these questions. It can't be easy from your perspective. You had mentioned earlier people coming here, and you have been a police officer and a chief for longer than most of the people on here you said have been alive. So I imagine that it is probably a difficult thing to go through, to suddenly have a lot of people question your methods, question your choices. I get it. It can't be easy. With everything that is going on in the country of police brutality, and it just seems to be occurring over and over and over again, I feel it is a very natural thing for us within our own communities to kind of question, wait, what's happening here? And can we be proactive in not letting that happen in our community? And, I just hope that you can be patient with us as we're trying to kind of work together and figure all of this out. I had a couple questions for you, because I think that if we are going to be trying to understand each other and move forward as a community. I wanted to know, you, Chief DeSena, what are your thoughts on the police brutality that we have been seeing across this nation? And it has, kind of caused issues within our communities as we have been having our Black Lives Matter march, and people are not really understanding where we're coming from when we're just citizens that want to see equality for all human beings, especially our Black population, where it seems like it's just been so much systemic racism and so many reasons for why we're in the situation that we are in right now. What are your personal thoughts about the police brutality that has happened? What are your personal thoughts about the Black Lives Matter marches that have happened in our community? I personally had a police officer write to me in a social media format and tell me to not participate in the Black Lives Matter march because it would cost the town money. I want to know, do you support the current civil rights movement? And what will you do to help, if you do support it, what will you do within your, our local police department to help all people be protected, not just some people be protected? Thank you so much. I really do appreciate you.
Thank you, Alicia. Chief, do you want to comment?
Alicia, that's a great question. It is, as I mentioned, and apparently people keep harping on that I've been a cop for a long time. I was here for Rodney King, I was here for Michael Brown, for Eric Gardner, and we see the same sort of cycle. I would have thought, and I believe, I sincerely believe here in California, we're a little ahead of the game for compared to the rest of the country, and I think here in Los Gatos, we're also a little ahead of the game. But I can't explain. I looked at video of Mr. Floyd. I can't explain that. I can't explain how an officer in Minneapolis is actually considered a fairly progressive department. I can't explain why whether or not he had fentanyl in the system. I can't explain why you kneel on a man's neck for 9 minutes and tell your other officers that don't worry about it. So what is clear is we still have a long way to go. As progressive as we think we are, we have a long way to go. I think I support, obviously, everyone's right to protest peacefully. I think it's very heartening for me that here in Los Gatos, a lot of these protests are being organized by young people, such as yourself. I think that's critical. And I have, my children are 20 and 17, or actually 20, 23 and 17, and they have questions. Of course, they support their dad who's been a cop for so long, but they have some real questions. It's a difficult conversation. So I think it really, I think this time it feels different to me. It feels different because the scope of people who are outraged by this, this continued behavior. There is clearly systemic racism in this country. There's no doubt about it. I have family members who were, in the internment camps. I don't have all the answers, Alicia, but I want to be part of the conversation, and I want to be part of the solution.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Alicia. Next is Heidi.
It looks like she lowered her hand. We can go to Jeffrey.
Jeffrey, welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me again. First, I'd like to say I'm pleased to hear the police department's dedication to publicizing the essential statistics on arrests and citations from here on out. I believe that it's extremely important that these statistics be released on perhaps a yearly basis, so that they could be studied for future improvements. We are, as we are aware, and as you've pointed out yourself, Chief DeSena, the statistics are not complete, and we certainly need more data, a better picture, and we need to continue our effort and dedication to that. Second, I unfortunately didn't get enough time to specify my point regarding the 21 uses of force, 0.024% of cases, and why it's necessary that the first response requires bringing a weapon that could mortally wound somebody in response to a nonviolent situation, and responded that this is a deep philosophical question. First, thank you, I suppose. To further move upon this point, I think we have to fundamentally question why our first response is sending an officer to, for example, dealing with dogs barking. And I'm not being hyperbolic. That's exactly what it says in our 2015 police staff report. The police department responded to over 3,800 calls that the sheriff and other towns typically wouldn't respond to, including dogs barking, parking violations, and other nonviolent incidents. And as a result, as said in the report, we are the most heavily policed town in the greater area among Cupertino, Los Altos Hills, Saratoga, Morgan Hill, Campbell, Los Altos, and our own town, Los Gatos. We have the highest number of service hours billed per capita. And this essentially means that we are the most policed town in the greater area. This is a consequence of our community policing model. So that is the fundamental question that I think should be framed regarding, is a police officer armed? Do we send armed police officers in response to certain situations? Second, I hope that you understand that it could look suspect to onlookers that materials cannot be published regarding the process that led to Silva's hiring. Now, I understand that the world is very complicated and there are some many messy details that might be involved or might not be able to be published, but either way, it doesn't look very good if those details aren't published. And I very much hope that our town takes the position of transparency on this matter. And finally, and this is a good faith question, I am personally the founder of the Los Gatos Anti-Racism Coalition, currently with over 280 members, as you've heard many of the other speakers during this segment pronounce themselves as members of. So I ask in good faith, how can our coalition best help the city? This is to any sort of official whatsoever. We are here to stay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Does the chief or any of the other panelists wish to comment?
I'll be happy to comment. And I welcome not only the Los Gatos Anti-Racist Coalition to continue to join us on this path and on this journey, but really all community members who are interested in helping Los Gatos become a more inclusive place. At the close of tonight's meeting, the mayor will identify some next steps and additional opportunities for all of you to engage with us. And we would really encourage everyone to be there. This is a long journey. This is a very important step, and we value everyone's comments and questions tonight. But I think this is hard work. And as we continue to grow as a community, we will all need to join hands and continue to work together. So stay tuned for more information about additional opportunities to work with us. Thank you.
And
Anyone
Judge,
else?
Heidi has raised her hand again.
All right. Does anyone else want to comment on Jeffrey's last question? If not, okay, then we'll move to Heidi. Heidi, welcome. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us this evening, Judge. My question's for Laurel. The police policy manual has 19 policies which are excluded from publication for, sort of privacy and protection of police officer reasons. And I was wondering who reviews those policies that are not open to the public? Do you review those? Does the town council review those? And are those part of the negotiations that happen with the union? Thank you.
So I'll start. I think our town attorney may need to join in here. So we do have a memorandum of understanding with our Police Officers Association, which is the name of our police union. It is public on our HR website, along with the other union agreements that the town enters into. Like many procedures, such as those in our library department and other departments, there are internal procedures that depending upon the nature of the policy and how it interfaces with our service delivery to the public, then I do see those policies and procedures. When it is an internal issue, then I may not. But certainly as we continue to look at policy reforms, the chief is very open with me about which ones he is modifying and in what direction. He does report to me, the chief, and all the officers are accountable to me. So I take the delivery of police services in a fair and equitable manner very, very seriously. And as I say, there's definitely room for improvement. and for us to do things, in a very transparent spirit. Some of our policies are based on best practices published by the state of California. And I know, of course, there's criticism at various levels of government, but we don't operate in a vacuum. There's a lot of collaboration that happens amongst chiefs throughout the state of California, and certainly here within Santa Clara County. And there are certain procedures for the safety of our officers that we will probably not be able to publish. And we respect and we appreciate your respect of the need to protect the public and officer safety. And I let the town attorney and or chief comment as appropriate.
I think you handled the answer correctly. The 19 policies I think you're referring to are usually ones that deal with the type of incident commands and how we handle certain critical incidences. And so those are not available to the public because we wouldn't want, if you want to say the bad guys, whoever in those situations, to know exactly what our next steps would be during critical incidences. So I review those. They're also really come from a national organization that puts together policies, but then we do incorporate, specific circumstances dealing with our town for each policy. But it's important for those 19, and we continue to look at those, even ones that we do not make public, to make certain there isn't any way we can make them public, because we are trying to be as transparent as possible.
Chief, do you have anything to add?
No, I believe Laurel and Rob covered it exactly. They're typically the policies and procedures that relate to officer safety concerns.
I will add that that is a very common practice in every police department. I know in San Jose, there are certain policies that are redacted. Give you one example on how to deal with hostage situations. The police do not want to put that information out. And so those kinds of things. And I think it was a very good question, by the way, to ask if indeed they are redacted so the public doesn't see them, are they still reviewed? We now go to 3 questions, 2 of which have been answered. I'm going to read them anyway. The first is the memorandum of understanding or a contract for police personnel publicly available? If not, can it be published? And that's already been answered. The information is public. And I'm assuming, and someone can answer this, it's online, and I'm not sure where online one would go to find it. Can anyone answer that quickly?
Yes, it is on the human resources page of the town website, and you'll find all of our union agreements there.
Thank you, Laurel. The second question, I believe, has been asked, and it was asked by Alicia, but I'm going to read it anyway. Does the chief believe that there is an issue of systemic racism in the history of the United States? Does he believe that Black lives are valuable and deserve to be treated with respect in this country? What are his thoughts on police brutality that is occurring throughout the United States? That is the question that Alicia asked, and the chief did respond. The third question, how much is the judge being paid on this call? My answer is that I am retained by the city as a consultant. My engagement agreement with the city, as well as my payment when it is made, will all be made public, and the information provided to anybody who wants to see. Do we have any more live speakers?
Not at this time.
All right, it is now 8:58 p.m. and I'll ask Jenna, do we have any more Q&A? Okay, apparently there are no more. Is that right, Jenna?
We do have additional Q&A, and I will send them to you now.
Oh, great. Okay. They're coming up shortly. And
Judge, while she's doing that, someone has raised their hand, Kareem Saeed.
All right, Kareem coming back. Go right ahead and welcome back.
I just wanted to say, I know we're coming into the close time, is just that, for myself, and I know a lot of the individuals who are here on this call, that I just want to say a personal thank you to Laurel, to Rob, to Pete, to Marsha, and also to you, Judge Ladores. That, I mean, it's heartening and it's beautiful that we're here together at this late hour, and we're talking about how to make the community better. And it's such a, for me, it's been eye-opening, and it's been, I just appreciate each and every single one of you. I know that, again, we sometimes lose the humanity. We sometimes start putting people into boxes, and otherized, and we forget the humanness of it, and that us as a human community coming together and having these discussions, and then especially all of you, I know you're spending a lot of time being civil servants and supporting this community. So just wanted to say I love you guys, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Kareem. Your comments are greatly appreciated, I'm sure, by everybody. Any more live speakers?
Not at this time.
All right, there are 3 questions. I'll take the first one to the chief. Can you define community police as a term, or put community policing?
Wow, it's like a test question. So community policing is really the essence of our mission statement that was created back in 2003 that we updated. So it is that combination. I mean, we are police officers, we have to do police work, but it's working in conjunction with the community, establishing those relationships every day, not just when we need them to be there, and then working with the community to develop solutions to problems that we decide with the community, or the community decides with us, that need to be solved. That to me is the essence of community policing. And again, it's not, we don't have community policing officers here. I think a lot of agencies have gone away from that. Community policing is how we do business every single day.
Thank you, Chief. Second question. Chief, you said 32 operational sworn officers and 22 civilian officers. This is 40% civilian, which means a not insignificant part of the budget for civilians. Is it easier for us to imagine what the sworn officer does, but since less visible, it's much harder to imagine why we have 22 civilian officers?
And I'm sorry, Judge, I'm trying. So the question is, why do we have civilian staff, or?
They're just looking at, again, it's easier for us to imagine. Is it easier for us to imagine what the sworn officer does, but since less visible, harder to imagine why we have the 22 civilians. So I guess the question is, what are the 22 civilian officers doing? That's one way to look at it.
Yes, so they are a critical function, and yes, they are often unseen, but they are so pivotal for us doing business. So that includes 8 dispatchers that work that 24/7, 365 to take calls from public and dispatch them to officers. It incorporates, I think it's 4 to 5 record staff that collate all of our reports and make sure that our reports get to help us facilitate investigations and filing charges with the district attorney's office. We have 2 parking control officers. Kind of losing track. We do have community outreach. I would say, like I said, they are every bit as critical to our success as an organization as the police. They're part of the team. We need them. The tendency is to have fewer civilian than you do, sworn officers, and that's usually the way it goes. But I'd say our civilian staff is just very important to how we conduct business.
Chief, the third is a comment. I'm just going to read it. The police do not know what they will be encountering when they respond to calls. I'm going to go ahead and we have 3 more questions in the queue here. I'm going to take them. The first, second comment from Barbara Rogan. I do not support canceling the police in schools, as I think it is an important introduction by the kids to law enforcement. Just a comment. Second is for the chief. You mentioned if action of force is used, it will be evaluated. Who evaluates this, and is it a third party? That's the first part. What types of training are in place for de-escalation tactics? You also mentioned that officers are expected to contact crisis intervention, CIT, for mental illness interactions. How do expectations work in policing? Shouldn't it be a requirement or not? Who makes that call? Please explain the disproportionality the disproportionately high arrest rate of Hispanic and Black individuals? This is all still one question here. You mentioned compassion on multiple talking points and in what ways does your police force learn and practice compassion? Please give examples of your compassion training with your force. Thanks. So we'll go back the first one, part of the question. Who evaluates the uses of force? Is it a third party?
It is not a third party. Every use of force goes through a use of force review. So the immediate supervisor creates a report that incorporates body-worn camera footage, does an analysis, and it goes to the chain of command through the captains, actually through both captains, and ultimately up to me. So it's not a third party. I'm the one who makes the decision on whether or not that force would be used.
The second, what types of training are in place for de-escalation tactics?
So our officers undergo a lot. Again, we have that grant where we're incorporating de-escalation tactics into our defensive tactics proficiency. So we are actually only required by post to go through, I think, 8 hours of defensive tactics training every 2 years. So we're increasing that to once a year, because the reality is a lot of times you see use of force by officers, excessive force is really due to lack of training and I think fear, because you're not trained properly. So I think the more training you can get, the less likely you are to use force. But again, it's just the whole de-escalation is part and parcel of our training, and also now it's part and parcel of our policy in regards to use of force.
All right, the next, you also mentioned, I'm going to change the wording a little, but I think this is the meaning of the question. You also mentioned that officers are expected to contact CIT, Crisis Intervention Training, for mental illness interactions. How do you know that those expectations are being met?
So as I mentioned, almost, I would say, it's at least 95% of our officers are trained in CIT. And it sounds great. It's 40 hours of training of dealing with a person in mental health crisis. The reality is that my officers are not clinicians. They are not licensed clinical social workers, so they do the best they can in that circumstance. So what we try to do is rely upon the mobile crisis response team, which we've actually had some good luck lately with some individuals who we have consistent contact with who are in mental health crisis, and we're working with their families and mobile crisis response to try to find some kind of solution, because the issue is a long-term solution. You can identify a person that is a danger to himself or others, put a 5150 hold, you go down to emergency psychiatric services. Literally, they've been, I think the record for Los Gatos is someone that was there for 8 minutes. The officer didn't even get back to his car before he was released. So that is part of the conversation with this working group now. I was surprised to find that behavioral health services is not in the same chain of command with emergency psychiatric services. EPS goes through BMC, and the behavioral health service is separate. So we actually have a representative, Mr. Ohashi, who's I believe the director of EPS, is now attending those meetings, so we kind of address those problems. So I'm sorry, that was kind of a long-winded answer, and I'm not sure if I actually addressed his actual question, but they're expected to, but they do. And it's not just the CIT training, it's a realization that oftentimes these situations require more than just CIT training. That's just a little band-aid for a particular situation. We're trying to achieve long-term solutions.
So the next question picks up on that. Instead of officers being expected to contact CIT, shouldn't it be a requirement? And who makes that call when CIT is supposed to go?
So again, the vast majority of officers here at the department are trained in CIT. So in essence, it is a requirement. And the reality is that for a 5150 hold, it's an officer's assessment that the person is gravely disabled, danger to self, danger to others. Those are the only three things that the officer can base that on. And a lot of times these situations are much more complicated than those 3 factors. So it's not just CIT. The importance is getting a mental health professional, the mobile crisis response team, and them working with EPS to not just bring a person in and they ask those same 2 questions, the person knows that the answer to the questions and they're released. The answer is developing long-term solutions so the people get treatment. And I said that is the conundrum that we're dealing with now, is trying to connect all those dots. And I believe that the county is supportive. There's funding. It's just a matter of putting all the pieces into place.
All right, the next one is a question that's been asked and answered. I'll read it anyway. Please explain the disproportionately high arrest rate of Hispanic and Black individuals. That's already been addressed twice, actually. And the last part of this question is, you mentioned compassion on multiple talking points. In what ways does your police force learn and practice compassion? Please give examples of your compassion training with your force.
So my initial observation is that just in general, it's a very compassionate department, the way they interact with many members of the community. However, it is a movement. Again, I wish I created it, but it's actually a movement that is being promoted by Chief Bob Johnson up in Palo Alto and Chief Jennifer Tejada from Emeryville. And it's actually training officers in mindfulness and compassion cultivation. So it's out of the Stanford, the courses and they just got it post-certified. So officers can actually take the course. I went through on my own. We've had officers attend retreats that I also attended. There is a virtual version of it, and this new class of courses can be virtual, but it's an actual class where you teach compassion for others. And I think the beginning is learning compassion for yourself by utilizing mindfulness, because oftentimes, most people, but I would say cops in general, are not very compassionate towards themselves. So in order to be compassionate towards others, you have to learn to be compassionate for yourself. So again, there's mindfulness training and then compassion cultivation training. So it is a course, and we actually got contacted by the Compassion Institute about this new course that's going up, and so we're offering it to officers, and we're really encouraging it. And I think it's, Alicia mentioned, it is a difficult time to be a police officer. So anything that we can do to help our officers cope with the stress, not just of the reaction to police violence, but the pandemic and the wildfires, anything that we can offer them to help calm their minds, I think is really critical.
Shelley, do we have any more live speakers?
We have one, Alicia again.
All right, Alicia, and then I'll take 3 questions from the Q&A. Go ahead, Alicia.
Yes, you had just mentioned that there was a Compassion Institute that worked with your police officers. May I please have more information about that? So I'm curious about that, and if there's any way that I could help with that. Like where are they located? What, are they hiring? I mean, I want to help in all areas. I mean, I understand that it's hard for everyone. And I also am just curious about their perspective. I'm not really privy to that. I think a lot of people aren't privy to that. And I would be interested in becoming involved in that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Chief?
So to answer, it is the Compassion Institute, which works out of Stanford University. They offer classes for everyone. I went to the non-police class. They did develop a class for officers specifically, and of course they had to rename the class. They actually call it the Courageous Heart, the Human Behind the Badge, because to get cops to go to class about mindfulness be kind of a struggle, but that is changing. But their website is, again, it's the Compassion Institute. Out of Stanford University. I don't have the actual URL, but it's if you I think search Compassion Institute, you'll find them. It's a pretty amazing group, and I have to compliment Chief Johnson and Chief Tejada for really bringing this. And they're not the only ones, but here in the area, they've really been championing this mindfulness and compassion cultivation for police officers. I think it's very important, and I think they are seeking instructors, so something to think about.
Thank you, Chief. And thank you, Alicia. I'm going to go to 3 more from the Q&A. I'm not sure I understand this first one. Where are the questions coming from that are not on this list in the Q&A? Does anyone understand that?
Sure, I can answer that. So
Go right
prior,
ahead.
thank you. Prior to this meeting, we asked members of the community if they had questions to submit them to a dedicated web email address. And so we received 2 sets of questions in advance, and we integrated them into tonight's conversation. And I've noticed that some of the authors of those questions are here with us this evening. So we wanted to respect those folks who took the time in advance to provide questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel. Second Q&A, what is the purpose of unmarked police vehicles? Chief?
So it depends on the scenario. We, in our patrol force, we don't have unmarked police vehicles. Our detectives do drive unmarked police vehicles. And typically it's for those situations where having a marked vehicle might compromise an investigation or that sort of thing. But we don't do undercover operations. We were historically, Los Gatos has been involved with a county task force called Santa Clara County Special Enforcement Team, in which case officers they worked a lot of sort of drugs and gun cases. So the officers were working, when assigned to this task force, they would work undercover with undercover police vehicles. But we've transitioned to, we now have an officer assigned to the REACT, which is the regional high-tech crime task force.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. Another comment from, let's see, Ali Miano. How about tracking which officers stop or arrest higher proportions of Black and brown individuals? If not, how will you ensure individual officers' accountability?
That's a really good question. I think, technically that is possible with our CAD RMS system. I think the reality is that we, especially an agency our size, I think we have a good sense of what our officers are doing. And if that is something that is occurring, I don't think that's going to be something that people are not going to be aware of. And again, I can't instruct my officers how to think, but I can control how they act while they're on duty. So that is something that will be addressed.
All right, another comment from Emmerich Bisbee. Are the officers who are the subject matter experts on the mental health calls, do the officers carry weapons when they respond?
Yes, they do. We do have, not currently, but we do hire community service officers who will wear uniform but unarmed. But our officers who are liaisons with the homeless community and with people in mental health crisis are police officers. So they're doing this as part of their job. So they are armed, they're in uniform, and they're responding. And I think despite that, I think they do a pretty amazing job. We have some instances where officers are reaching out and working, just trying to find solutions to people who are really struggling.
Thank you, Chief. Do we have any more live speakers?
We do. We have Ali Miano.
Anyone else?
Not at this time, just her.
All right. Okay. Go right ahead, Ali.
Okay, just really quick. I don't want to keep mentioning this event that I was involved in when I was stopped, but it just sets me off a little bit when I hear about the unmarked police car, because that's who stopped me. So if there's an unmarked police car out there who's supposed to be involved in drug busts, and instead they get me coming out of the optometrist's office when I picked up my kids' glasses that just were broken, and then the policeman accuses me of having been drinking at Hannigan's across the street, and actually and then he gets angry at me because I drive home because it's just a few blocks away. And I'm thinking, I don't know if this person in an unmarked police car is really an officer because I haven't done anything wrong. So why should I stop? And then in front of my house, he makes me do a sobriety test when I haven't had a drink for 3 days. And so you can imagine how angry I was getting. And because of my anger, which you can hear in my voice, it was about the same then too. I was treated in a ridiculous fashion. And my concern is not for myself, because like the case that Nika brought up with her brother, or her relative who's married to a white woman, I know that once I open my mouth, and maybe I'm not taken for a Latina anymore, I'm going to be safe. Ultimately, I'm concerned about, yes, Latinas, Latinos, Black, Brown. I'm concerned about all those people. What is going to happen to them if they're, as Amy said, if they're not recognized as a local? So, and having a brother who, thankfully, it wasn't the local police, but a brother who lives here in Los Gatos and is a diagnosed schizophrenic. He takes medication and he's able to function relatively well, but once when he walked too far out of the neighborhood, he was stopped by police in San Jose and beaten terribly because they took him for a drug addict. So these are the kinds of things that we need to prevent before they happen. And I want to know what we're going to do here in Los Gatos. Another thing I put in the, I'm running out of time. Another thing I put as a question is, why are we sending police to deal with homeless? Why don't we find shelter for them? Wouldn't that be a better allocation of resources?
Thank you, Ali. Thank you. So what I'll do is I'll go back to the questions, because it is the one that Ali just asked, and I'll read it. Why are the police in charge of people living on the streets? That's precisely an area to which we could allocate effective services like homes.
I agree with her completely. And I think we are the resource of last resort. We work, we have two officers that work very closely with many of our faith communities that do offer services. We have a fairly stable community of about, I think, 13 or 16 unhoused in town who consider themselves to be residents of Los Gatos. They just don't happen to live in the house. So they have a very good relationship with them. We do get other homeless folks that will wander in town. Unfortunately, there's a number of the individuals that do suffer from mental health issues. A lot of that is, again, if there was some ability or some resource to respond to those calls, I'm all for it. It's just not there, and somebody has to respond, and that is us for now. So we're doing the best job that we can, but we are not a long-term solution. We are simply, again, a small band-aid for a situation that is occurring, and it is not a long-term. You're right. We need more housing. We need more funding. We need better mental health services, and I would love to see that.
Thank you, Chief. Do we have any more live speakers?
We do, Daniel.
All right, go right ahead, Daniel.
Hi, thank you, and thanks again for answering my questions earlier. I'll go quick because I know there's a lot of questions in the Q&A. I just wanted to point out, and it looks like someone else also asked this in the chat, I had questions about unmarked vehicles as well, because there was one at the BLM protest that I went to. I'm sure that's what this other person is mentioning, because they were there, there were police around them, and there were lights on the vehicle. So it was pretty obviously a police vehicle. And that doesn't necessarily mesh with the uses that you've outlined. So I was wondering if there was some reason for that vehicle to be used in an entirely peaceful event. And then I guess just, I hear you saying if I could have issues with people who are experiencing homelessness and mental health issues passed off, I totally would. So what is the next step then for the town? It's going to be really hard, but what is that action step? What is that service that is provided after we get out of this conversation, as we start to draft like what these ideas are that are actionable? What does that look like? Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Daniel. So I'm going to ask Chief for you to hold off on the second part of Daniel's question about next steps, because that's going to be the last question, and it's going to open it up for the Mayor to wrap up. So we'll hold off on that. His question though is about why was the marked car at the protest? Unmarked car, excuse me.
We do have unmarked cars and we will utilize them for surveillance in certain situations. Sometimes with these protests, we're not spying on people, but we don't also want to inflame the situation by having a distinct presence. So our approach to these protests is to really have a sort of a soft touch. So we want people to protest peacefully, certainly have that right. But unfortunately, in situations, sometimes unfortunate things occur. So we want to keep eyes on. So I'm not sure if that's the case, particularly in this one. But again, we will utilize unmarked cars for surveillance and for a variety of reasons.
Any other live questions right now?
Jeffrey Suzuki raised his hand.
All right, Jeffrey, go right ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a few seconds just to thank everybody here. I understand it took a lot of coordination and time to organize a meeting like this, and I would like to personally thank the chief for taking the time to answer all of these questions. Yeah, so just wanted to express my gratitude. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Are there any other questions, live questions? If not, I'm going to ask these last three, and that should do it for this workshop. Actually, I
have two more.
All right, so why don't we go ahead with the live speakers, and we'll end with these written questions. And who's up next?
Alicia is up next.
And then?
It was a C. Musser, but she or he lowered their hand.
Okay, all right. But I think Alicia will be the last live speaker, and then we'll wrap it up with these written questions. Go ahead, Alicia.
I was wondering, in your opinion, Ladoris, is there anything that we should have asked and have not asked? Are you available to give us advice on, is there anything that we didn't cover and should have covered? You have experience in this, and I know that you have been successful in this. Given everything that you know, that I know that you've done research, I know you have, given everything that you know about our town and everything that you have heard tonight, are you available to give us your opinion tonight? You know, what do you think about Los Gatos, and you know, what do you think that we could do to help our community in terms of the police department from both sides? How, in your opinion, how can we make our community better?
Very briefly, I'm retained as a consultant, as a facilitator tonight, not to as a panelist or to answer questions. I've tried to give information where I thought information was needed. Have all questions been asked? A lot, and I'd say this is one of the most comprehensive kinds of programs, workshops, forums, town halls that I've heard so far. Absolutely, you know, the questions have been relevant and they've been comprehensive. Can I think of some that haven't been asked yet? No, not really. You've covered those who've written in, those of you who have spoken up have covered a wide range of issues that it's going to have to now go to the town council. So my own views, if I am asked by the town officials, the town leaders to have input, I am not an expert. Alicia, for any of you, I'm not an expert in all of this stuff. I mean, the experts are, there's a police chief. I know the area of civilian oversight very well because I became so involved in it for 5 years. So I'm more than glad to be of assistance if I can. And you know, that's really up to your town leaders to make that call. But thank you very much, Alicia, for asking the question. I'm going now, because that'll be the last one from live speakers. So I have 2 questions, I think 3, and then wrap up. First one, how can community members sign up for ride-alongs? Are they on hold during COVID? I have been fortunate to participate in 2 ride-alongs in the past 6 years and learned so much about the wide variety of issues the police officers addressed in a shift and how well trained they are to respond compassionately. Chief?
We certainly welcome ride-alongs, but unfortunately, yes, with the pandemic, we've had to stop that. We also had planned for last spring a Citizens Police Academy that also, due to the pandemic, we actually had to cancel. We're actually looking at the possibility of doing a virtual police academy, but there's something about that interaction, that face-to-face, I think is really important. But to answer the question, once we get past the pandemic, we are certainly welcome citizens, our community members, to ride along. I think it's very illuminating, and I highly encourage it.
Another question. So resource officer created a vaping sting operation worth the money. Couldn't the principal have handled that, or any faculty member for that matter? Chief?
I'm sorry, I must have misspoke. It was not a vaping sting operation. It was actually a vaping awareness class for faculty. So there was there was an issue with vaping at Los Gatos High School, to the point not just in the bathrooms, but actually kids vaping in class. So the teacher's just unaware that then when the kid is wearing a hoodie and reached down into taking hits. So again, it was actually a vaping awareness and then followed by a vaping diversion class. When students were found vaping in class or vaping on campus, which is a violation of their rules.
Another question, are police officers required to watch this Zoom recording so they can hear the community's concerns and hear town leadership's guidance?
We certainly encourage. I know I have a number of officers that are actually watching right now. I think the big issue, a big plan for me is it really depends. But I think the takeaway is all these concerns that we can kind of winnow down into issues that we can bring. I go to briefings to chat with the officers and talk about issues that are facing us. And I said I will certainly bring a lot of these. Number one being the wearing of masks. So yes, they will become aware, if not specifically of the Zoom meeting, but of the issues that are being brought up tonight.
Another question, comment from Jeffrey Suzuki. The second question in my statement earlier was whether or not we can release data regarding ethnic and racial composition of arrests and citations, perhaps on a yearly basis.
I think that may be answered. We're not required to do the full data until so we'll start collecting in 2022. But prior to that, we're going to start collecting basic data on our new CAD RMS system, so we can present that data on our website or in the town's annual report, so we can daylight that information.
Another question, I am curious if the chief understands implicit bias and can further explain why implicit bias training is not mandatory. No overt racist on the force is a painfully low bar.
That's a really, really good question. I think early on, I can't recall, it was actually up in Palo Alto. We had Dr. Lori Fidel ran one of the first implicit bias cases. I was still working at San Jose at the time. I can't give you a scholarly elucidation of what implicit bias is, but it's something that we all possess. And I think, I think it fits in very well with the concerns about systemic racism. I think which does exist. It is and I don't know that I know they take implicit bias classes now in the academy. We do offer the classes. We actually recently had a diversity panel with the Islamic Network Group and members of representatives from the Sikh religion, as well as members of the Jewish religion. So it's something that we are aware of, and we try to expose our officers to and let them see these viewpoints and see these different facets of life. But again, I apologize. I lost track of what the final.
That's fine.
portion of that
No, you,
question? Okay.
you answered the question. I do want to add that the leading expert in the country on implicit bias as it applies to policing is right here in our community and at Stanford. There's Professor Jennifer Eberhardt. She's African American. She was a MacArthur Genius about 3 years ago for her work in this area, so that if the town of Los Gatos is interested in bringing her team to Los Gatos, I think it's absolutely worth it. I know her, I interviewed her because she's written a book recently called Biased. And it's a terrific read about implicit bias, but she is the leading expert. She is a social psychologist at Stanford. So it's Jennifer Eberhard, and I can certainly give you contact information if you're interested. The third question I have here, text Q&A, why was there an unmarked vehicle at the Black Lives Matter protest? That's already been asked and answered. Do we have any more live? I think we've ended the live questions. Is that right?
I do have one more.
Okay, go right ahead. Who is that?
C. Musser.
Go right ahead. Lee, are you there?
You need to unmute yourself, C. Musser.
C, excuse me. If you unmute.
Can you hear me?
Go right ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Go right ahead. Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to get one comment in before this is over. I just want to comment and thank Chief DeSena and the department because they do a great job with our homeless. I don't think the community is even aware of all the services that are provided. They know, the department knows all the homeless and who they are. And I think it's kind of amazing to me. I think our community can be thankful and grateful for how the homeless are managed and are taken care of. And it's not a simple solution. I am very well with mental illness, and I know a lot of the homeless myself. And I know it's not a simple solution when people say just find housing. It's more than that. But I also just want to a hats off and a shout out to you guys. Thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to a question in the Q&A. I know Los Gatos has a strong police foundation, and they raise a lot of money and support your department. How allegiant are you to their board? And how can we be assured that you make your own decisions about your force?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I will tell you that coming to Los Gatos was the first time I dealt with a police foundation. They do, I wouldn't say, they have provided money to us and for training. They support, or they're particularly animal friendly. So they've really supported a lot of our efforts with the canine. We have a bloodhound now, a collaborative bloodhound, which they supplied money for. And I was very cautious, and I've had friends who are the chiefs who have not had good experience with police foundations. So I was a little leery in the beginning, but I think as I've got to know the board of directors, I realized that they are not doing it because they want a CCW permit or want this or that. They're really very committed to this town, and they supportive of the police department. And I've never had a situation where they ask for something in return for what they do for us. I think it's really they do it out of the goodness of their heart. So I'm allegiant to them because they're good people, but I'm not beholden to them for any sort of law enforcement decisions as relates to the fact that they help us.
Thank you, Chief. Are there any more live questions, live speakers? All right, so go right ahead.
No, there are not.
All right, so I'm going to ask the last question. And before I do that, I thank the 80 more of you and who actually participated and those who sent in your Q&As. I thank all of you for your participation and for allowing me to facilitate this workshop on policing. I am ever hopeful that this moment in our country will make us stronger, will make us kinder, and will bring all of us closer. And with that, I'm going to ask the last question in the Q&A. What are the next steps for the town council and this group? Are you solely a member for determining how funds are allocated? The chief himself said he'd be happy to accept defunding and reallocating to support mental health cause. Great, let's do it. How do we move forward? What more is needed to make it happen? I'll leave it over to the mayor.
Judge, thank you. That's a perfect closing question for me to respond to. Like Judge Cordell, I want to sincerely thank all of you who took the time and took the effort to give us such positive and constructive feedback on these difficult questions, who chose to participate in this forum and put their faith in us as a town and as a police department to respond to these questions and to listen what you had to say. As Laurel said earlier, this is not a one-off program or one-stop process. This is a long process that we're going to go through. But that said, and I should say, I have to step back and thank my fellow council people for being here tonight. But you were not just listening to by the people you see on the screen. Our vice mayor and our 2 council members were also present throughout this evening. Thank you very much for attending. That said, our next step is not going to be, with respect to police, will not be another workshop. Instead, what it's going to be is a council meeting. We already have that scheduled for September 15th. And what we intend to do is think about, understand, and assimilate those comments that we received, put them together with the 3 policy questions that we started out with, which were oversight. We did hear support for oversight of some form, and the council will need to discuss how, when, why that might happen and what form it would take. We definitely heard support for mental health and social services where that's appropriate. And when I started out, I did say that we have to rethink how we use policing, and that was a topic that came up a lot. Is it appropriate to call the police for a barking dog? Is it appropriate for the police to respond to a homeless person? Or are there better ways to do that? And that's one of the things that we can take away from this and then address at our council meeting. And the final thing was our use of a police resource officer, a school resource officer. How should that person be used? Should that person be used? And should that person be armed? And we heard a lot of questions surrounding arming itself, or unmarked cars, or how the police responds to certain circumstances. I, for one, am very curious about that. I'm a career prosecutor. So I saw good policing, bad policing. And one of my abiding questions is, does a firearm or arming, and I know this is controversial, does that ramp up the possibility of a violent confrontation, or does it ramp it down? So I actually think that that's a question that's worth discussing in terms of mental health responses and how we use police. But that said, our council meeting on this is scheduled for September 15th, and we will discuss these questions. We are committed to a continuing series of workshops. So on September 29th, there will be a similar workshop as this, a Zoom meeting on affordable housing. So those of you that were curious and suggesting, isn't the solution for homeless to house them? We anticipate a whole discussion around affordable housing, how that could work in Los Gatos, what we could do, what the solutions are, what the state laws are surrounding housing. So we welcome your participation in that event as well. And yet to be determined, but sometime in earlier, and that will also be followed by a council meeting where we'll try to take action. So our plan is we will try to listen very carefully, assimilate what we hear, and then try to translate that to action. That's the same thing we'll do with the affordable housing element on September 29th. And we do have a workshop that we're calling Community Culture that we'll schedule sometime in October as our panelists become available. And that's more of a not so much directed conversation about how can Los Gatos be a better, more welcoming, more inclusive, more diverse community, that we now recognize the issues that we've had in the past, and we work toward trying to repair those and work towards solutions. And one of the first solutions is this kind of workshop and this kind of participation. So I can't leave it off without thanking so much Judge Ladores Cordell, your contribution to this has been just invaluable. Your communication skills are off the charts and your expertise is amazing. So your help is so much appreciated. But I want to throw it over to Laurel for closing next steps and website information and information about our upcoming workshops. So Laurel.
Before you do that, Mayor, just let me say, it takes courage for leadership to step forward and delve into and grab a hold of controversial issues that mean a lot to people. And I see that, and another reason why I wanted to participate and agree to facilitate this. So I hope that the residents of Los Altos understand that there are community leaders who see things happen and don't do much. And it takes real courage. Mayor, you and those on your council who decided to step forward and really take this issue head on. So I have all the best wishes for you all, and this is a major and an important first step. So kudos to you all as well.
Appreciate that, Judge. Thank you. Laurel?
Sure.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Judge, and thank you to the mayor. Thank you to the council for being in attendance. We also had many other community members and town staff join us this evening. So thank you to all of you. And of course, thank you to the chief and our town attorney for assisting with all the questions and then the upfront data. So we do really want to encourage all of you to stay involved. We have a dedicated email called community@losgatosca.gov. You can send your additional comments and questions to us there. It is part of our Becoming a More Inclusive Community website that is available on the front page of the Los Gatos homepage. So please visit us. We update that section frequently with the upcoming workshops, as the mayor described. Next week, the council will be considering these many comments and providing direction to staff in terms of next steps regarding these and many other potential reforms. We will also be providing a high-level budget overview of the police department for those of you who might be interested in those data. This has been recorded as a Zoom meeting, and it's also being recorded by our local television station, KCAT, which means it will be available through the KCAT YouTube channel, as well as their own website. So we will be posting the KCAT broadcast and making that available. All the Q&A will be put together in a frequently asked question. So that way, if you missed one of the answers or want to go back, you'll be able to use it as a reference point. And then, as the mayor mentioned, we will be continuing this series of community conversations by next discussing affordable housing and how it interfaces with concerns about racism in our community and what we can do to address that. And that'll be on September 29th. So please join us, please stay engaged and stay in touch. Thank you so much to everyone for your involvement this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and good night. Thank you for your participation.